Welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. My name is Matt Delvecchio, specializing in free retirement, home search, and senior transition support. Here in studio with Corrie Sirota, clinical social worker and psychotherapist, specializing in grief and loss. Corrie, hats off to your daughter, Justine. She did a fantastic job and sending out such an important message out there about body image and body positivity. Proud mama, I see.
Thank you.
We are so blessed, Corrie, to have our next guest. Could you please introduce him?
With pleasure. Most people know Scott Oake as the on-ice reporter for Hockey Night in Canada. But Scott really has a much more personal story to share with us today. He's on the line. His son, Bruce, battled a drug addiction, and unfortunately, in 2011, the drug addiction won. And Bruce tragically died. Scott is on the line with us, and he's going to share his experience and how that experience propelled him into becoming an advocate for drug addiction awareness. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Oh, my pleasure to be with you.
So I thank you so much for giving us your time, and I guess the best place to start is at the beginning. Can you please tell us Bruce's story?
I'll try to keep this under 2 hours.
Fair enough.
It's a heartbreaking story, but it started out with so much hope, as every child has. Bruce was a very precocious child. He was a good athlete, Canada Games boxer, made his varsity basketball team in high school, but he had been diagnosed with ADHD, so that made him impulsive, and started, I guess, with weed in high school, which didn't separate him from a lot of kids, but the ADHD and the impulsiveness that goes with it meant that he was not one to turn down an invitation to use ecstasy, and from there it was crystal meth, and from there it wasn't a giant leap into the opioids and the drug that eventually claimed his life, heroin. We were with Bruce every step of the way. We never lost contact with him, but the sad truth is that the last 5 years of his life were a roller coaster of active addiction, recovery, relapse. And that's the way it went until the day in March of 2011 when we got the call that he had died of a heroin overdose in Calgary. So on the plane on the way to get him, we decided that there was no shame. We were resolute in this, that there was no shame in the disease that claimed his life, addiction, and that we wouldn't hide it. So the first line of Bruce's obituary reads, "Tragically, Bruce lost his battle with addiction at the tender age of 25." And that really was the start of the project that we're knee-deep in now, which is our attempt to establish a long-term recovery center in Winnipeg, 50 beds, 4 men. The two cornerstones of it are long-term, because we learned during Bruce's tragic journey that 21 days, 45 days, 90 days were not nearly enough. Those are, I guess, akin to rinse and wash and spin-dry cycles in the world of addiction recovery. And the other cornerstone is that no one will be turned away because they can't afford to pay. So that's what we're doing, and we're getting closer every day.
That's Scott Oake here on Life Unrehearsed. You may know Scott as the, Scott, I like to say the Gemini Award-winning reporter, and you know him probably through Hockey Night in Canada, and we're talking about the loss of his son Bruce to drug addiction. And Scott, you had mentioned that Bruce, I guess, had several bouts of rehab and in and out, and I can't imagine as a parent, there must be this feeling of helplessness where you want to try and there's hope, and then there's probably the ups and downs. And how did you manage going through that when he was going in and out?
Well, I think Corrie would agree that when family members want recovery for an addict more than the addict wants it him or herself, it's a recipe to make it crazy. We, though, we're always on the same wavelength with Bruce. He never, ever disputed that he had to go to rehab. So he wanted a better life, and he tried hard. He fought hard for it. He had 8 or 9 stints in detox and 4 in treatment centers. He had the best year of his addicted life at a long-term facility in Calgary, the 3-phase long-term facility, the like of which we hope to open here in Winnipeg. He stayed for a year, and we often conclude that if he had stayed another year, he would still be alive. So that's why we are devoted to long-term recovery.
Which makes perfect sense. And when you've lived the experience, you mentioned something earlier that really resonated with me. On your plane ride to go recover Bruce's body, you said that you made the decision that you wouldn't be ashamed. And that to me is so powerful, because I think that if we keep it under wraps and we make it always about the elephant in the room and we don't want to talk about it, we can't deal with it, and we can't have these conversations to create better services out there. So can you speak a little bit more about how, or the process of not being ashamed? How did you come to that?
Well, we see as part of our mission to reduce it and, God willing, eliminate the stigma attached to addiction, because the stigma is so great for so many families that it often can preclude recovery. We all have heard the expression, "You're only as sick as your secrets." Those who suffer from cancer and lose their battles with cancer, almost always you'll read in the obituary, staged a valiant or courageous struggle with cancer. But addicts die ugly deaths, and they often die alone. And that's what happened to our son. But we're not ashamed of it, because addiction is a disease. The medical definition of addiction is it's a chronic brain disorder. Mm-hmm. And you just nailed it there, Corrie, until we can talk about addiction in the same way that we talk about other diseases, recovery is going to be a challenge for far too many people. And, we never, when Bruce was on his journey, we never hid behind it. People would ask us, how's Bruce doing? And we would always say, he's battling an addiction issue right now, but we're doing everything we can to help him. The people who were true friends, wanted to know more, wanted to know what they could do to help. And the people who weren't friends and whom we eventually didn't care about were the ones who just, turned around and walked the other way because they couldn't deal with it. So we've always been about, being quite open about Bruce's struggles, and we're not in this to give advice to anybody. We just tell our story, and if people can take something from it, then God bless them. But, if other people could, and we're not saying that they need to be as open as us, but if they could get past that stigma, it would lighten an incredible load that they're carrying around.
That's Scott Oake talking about his son Bruce and his battle with drug addiction, and unfortunately passed away in March 2011. And Scott is spreading the word about the story. And like you said, Scott, you're not a clinical. You can't offer clinical advice. You're talking from a dad's perspective, and I think that's one of the questions that many parents might have that are listening. From a dad's perspective, what could you say to parents that may be concerned with children that are going through drug addiction?
Well, I would tell them our story and how we, found out that Bruce was struggling, and what we did when we found out. We acted quickly. I took him to an emergency room at the local health sciences center here, and we waited for, I think, it was about 8 or 9 hours. It felt like 20. Because he was coming down and he wanted out of there so badly, and it was very, very difficult to keep him there. But we eventually saw a doctor who identified immediately what the problem was, and we knew it anyway, but he confirmed it for us and said that he could put him on the wait list for what it's called here is Addictions Foundation of Manitoba. It's government-run addiction treatment programs. But he said, unfortunately, the waiting list is about 4 to 6 weeks. And that was a lifetime for us at that point. We wanted help right away. Or he said, you can go private. And we decided instantly to go private. And so we sent him, he had to go to detox first, and he had 7 days there. And then I took him to a private facility just outside of Toronto. It cost us $25,000 for 45 days. That's a lot of money, but we were willing to spend everything we had to get our son
Certainly,
right.
as a parent, I can well imagine you do what you need to do. We want to hear more about that. I actually want to hear about creating the service and the program that you want, because I know you did an incredible fundraiser this summer. So we want to hear about that, but first we must go out to a traffic update with Lauren Glazer.
Live Fund Rehearsed on CJAD 800. Brought to you by Marco Vendramini of IG Private Wealth Management. MarcoVendramini.com.
Let's dance with Mary. chain. One more time to kill the pain.
And welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. I'm Matt Delvecchio with Corrie Sirota, and we're talking to Scott Oake. You may know Scott from his Hockey Night in Canada reporting, his Olympics coverage. Scott has a much more personal story, and he has become an advocate for drug addiction awareness. Unfortunately, Scott lost his son, Bruce, in 2011, and he is on air with us talking to us about Bruce's story, and hopefully we could all get a little something, some tips, advice. And Scott, thank you for being on the line with us on this very important subject. And just before the break, we talked about a little bit about your Bruce Oake Recovery Center. You are doing amazing things with this, and I saw, I guess, on the news recently, you had a huge fundraiser this summer. I even saw Don Cherry and Ron McLean and a whole bunch of others there. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Bruce Oake Recovery Center, and then a little bit more, I guess, about that particular fundraiser?
Yeah, I'll just finish the point I was making before we went to commercial there. We took Bruce to his private treatment center just outside of Toronto when we were made aware of the struggle he was in. We thought that he would finish there in the 6-week program that he attended for a lot of money, and we'd all go back to our happy lives, and that's not the way it turned out. So drug addiction was, it was profound for him, and it was the start of a journey that ended tragically. Here's what we know, and I think everybody else does as well. Daily on the news, we hear words like fentanyl, carfentanil, Narcan, naloxone. Those last two things are very worthy things. We should, because they're antidote kits, we should do whatever it takes to save the lives of anybody. But the word we don't hear in the conversation nearly enough is treatment. And until treatment is made available to the countless addicts who can't afford to go private, then nothing in this crisis is going to change. We're just going to go around in circles. So we're committed. The Bruce Oake Memorial Foundation is committed to establishing a 50-bed long-term recovery center in Winnipeg. We've raised significant funds to this point, and the fundraiser that you're talking about was called Hockey Night in Canada, one night only at the Met Theatre in Winnipeg. And it raised, the figure was made public, so I can share it with you. It raised well over $300,000.
Incredible. Nice.
It was a great night, and for, first of all, awareness and the enjoyment everybody got out of it. So we're very much in the public consciousness here in Winnipeg, and we hope that when the city, in fact, has given us a piece of property that we're currently trying to get rezoned, when the rezoning is complete, we'll kick off a capital fundraising campaign, and the Bruce Oake Recovery Center will be built sooner than later.
That's beautiful, and I hear you. The treatment. We it's I'm all about, as people know me, about the now what factor. It's all very nice to know all this information, but what are you going to do with the information, and how are you going to make things happen? So, in this treatment center, what do you envision? I think you mentioned a little bit more, but I'd like to know a little bit more about what services you would envision and why.
We're patterning the Bruce Oake Recovery Center after a facility in Calgary called Fresh Start. It's been in existence for 25 years. It has an astounding success rate of 55%, and that's a very responsible metric in that it's measured based on residents being sober 1 year after entering the program. You can find a lot of recovery centers where they might say that we have a 75% success rate because people leave, the 90-day program sober. But this is a year, so that's a pretty strict measurement. 3 times, I think 4 times, Fresh Start has been named the #1 recovery center in Canada, and I think in 2014 or around about 2014 was named Canada's #1 social service agency. They offer a 3-phase long-term program. The residents can stay for as long as it takes to get it right. That could be a year, could be 2 years, could be 3 years. But if you're a young man and you want to become a contributing member of society, that's, even though it might feel like a lot of time at that moment, it's not an enormous sacrifice to get your life turned around. So Fresh Start will essentially administer and run their program at the Bruce Oake Recovery Center, and we're excited about that.
Yeah, very exciting is right, Scott. And I think you said the key is the long-term factor, and there were just not enough of that available out there.
No, and there's a lot of private facilities. I mean, drug addiction recovery is really becoming an industry, and given baby boomers, in our area of the city where we live in Winnipeg, there are assisted living facilities in every corner, and those are for-profit facilities. Nice. And private treatment is for-profit. There's nothing wrong with that. If you got the money and it can get you sober, God bless you, whatever it takes. But most addicts do not have any money to go anywhere. And, our commitment as this is part of Fresh Start's program, if you can't afford to pay, you're not turned away. Your daily per diem is covered by a combination of social assistance and fundraising. We feel that's a game changer in the world of addiction recovery.
Well, I wish you the best of luck with this project, and if we can be a help, I would ask you I want to thank you for your time, and let us know how can people donate or hear more about this project.
Just go to bruceoak.ca, and that will follow the prompts, and you'll be able to donate, and you'll also be able to learn everything you have to about what we're planning here.
That's fantastic. And that's Bruce Oake, O-A-K-E. Scott, thank you so much for taking some time and talking about this worthy cause.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Matt, what's up for next week?
All right. Very interesting show. Next week on Life Unrehearsed, we will have a notary extraordinaire, Nadia Dirigi. Do we have our legal documents, Corrie, all in place? Believe it or not, over 50% of people don't have wills even. So we're going to be addressing that and all the differences between these legal terms. And we will also have Paula Toledo in studio that will be talking to us about how she became an inspiration to many, TEDx talker, after she experienced a tragic loss. So you can catch us here on Life Unrehearsed every Sunday at 4 p.m. Thank you very much for joining us.